Welcome to this new idea. I am your host, Conrad Meyers. This is a little chat show where I reach out to artists and people that work in creative fields to talk about how their ideas come about, the processes with which they develop those ideas, and the challenges around creativity. This week, I'm welcoming artist Eddy Falconer, who's visiting me from, I believe, San Francisco.
No, Berkeley.
Berkeley, that's right.
Berkeley.
Welcome, Eddy.
Welcome to you.
Oh.
Welcome to Berkeley.
Welcome to Berkeley. Oh, that's right. I am currently in Berkeley.
Yes.
This is fantastic. It's really great to chat. I've known of your work for a little while. You were in the very first aggregate animated shorts festival.
That's correct.
With your piece Hoopla, which I still think of fondly.
I'm glad.
Particularly, it's so funny that there are moments in that piece that I think about a lot during any government mistrust moments, which has been a lot the last few years.
Yeah.
And we're on our fourth animated aggregate. It's doing its fourth, so we're just starting to build up momentum and reaching out. And
Cool.
we're probably going to rear project it from the inside of a business in Oakland so that it can just be viewed from the street. I don't know what other options we have.
Well, that's a very creative one. So that sounds.
That's right. Yeah. Right, we're working through things as they come. But how are you? What are you working on?
Well, I've been doing a lot of things that come out of animation and also out of earlier work, like design work.
Mm-hmm.
My background actually was theater and live action film somewhat. And so, all designing characters and backgrounds and stuff, it comes from a sort of a 3D world rather than digital. And so I'm always kind of thinking like, well, this doesn't have to be an animation. It could turn into something with masks, or it could turn into something with projections, or, I mean, not like sitting in a room projections, when the audience is, but, with more interactive type things. And so, I get from, masks from a few years ago to, you see I've really progressed.
Oh,
actually, this is actually a background, and I don't, it's what it usually becomes is something like a background for an animation, and then I'll animate the background, or I'll put a figure in front of it, or whatever. But there's something about that I find ultimately very tedious. Unless I have a story to tell, which is, I guess, par for the course. But I don't really do linear narrative. In animation, that can be problematic, I think, because so many things rely on knowing where something is going ahead of time and making it get there. And my painting practice is a lot more spontaneous than that. So sometimes I'll just do a whole bunch of similar things. So there's this one, but then there's also this one, and then there are like 20 of them, and then there are like 50 of them, or whatever, and it's either on paper, or then I realize, I used the wrong kind of paper, it doesn't fit on the scanner. And but I liked the paper so much for some other completely other use, like making a zine, or so the little advert that I sent you that is done completely in digital space,
right?
It's done with a Cintiq tablet that's like more than 10 years old, and which I hate because it has so many cables. The idea of these things is you're supposed to be a little bit portable.
Right.
And I used to have this laptop that I would use with it, so I could at least do it in the living room, but now I have to sit in the studio with the monitor and the everything, and because I don't have a laptop.
Uh-huh.
So it's this very cumbersome process, and I also don't like the way it feels while I'm drawing. But that's the tablet I have, and that is sort of the new way that I've been working with abstract things rather than with figures. Because, okay, I mean, like a mask or characters. Maybe you've seen some of these.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't have something, there's a temptation when you're starting with the visual rather than with the story. You have these creatures.
Uh-huh.
And in animation, it's like a cliche. You've got creatures. You know, what are they going to do? They're going to have a conflict. They're going to have a competition. There's going to be lasers and stuff going on, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, I'm not George Lucas, and why did I ever even think I should do this? You know, and I don't want to be George Lucas because I don't want to go to work every day.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and do, and I'm not really, you know, I'm fortunate that I don't have to, but I'm also not really wired to do that very well. So, in this sort of whirlwind of thinking of different projects and stuff, it just seems that in the last 10 years or so, this is what's worked best.
Right.
It seems to be the work people show is animations of mine, primarily. So I'm sort of, oh yeah, I kind of remember like, well, I've got this thing with this sort of series of the little abstractions. They're different ones, most of which are made in digital space, but some of which start with a physical painting, or several. Because I started making music, the idea is that maybe there would be like 7 little spots and 7 music tracks that would go for just like a couple of minutes for each one, and this could be an installation or it could be a sort of anthology, or you know, if when you go out and see art, sometimes you get the best input from, you know, of course, from other artists. And I was in Los Angeles sometime last year, a million years ago that was last year, and I went to the Wende Museum, which is the museum of the fall of the wall, of the Berlin Wall, and there was this wonderful piece by a woman who had collages, you know, like standard thing. I think there was a lot of sewing pattern imagery in them, but in frames on the wall, and she had made soundtracks to go with these still images, so that you had a set of headphones and you listened to a track that she had composed on like tape a million years ago. This is work from before the wall that they were showing, before the wall fell, and I sometimes I think things like that. I think, well, why not just have something that people experience solo? You know, with the soundtrack, you know, not blasting from all directions or something. So, yeah, I like. There are a lot of different ways to exhibit things that are made in so many different mediums, I guess. And so, thematically, anyway, in terms of these 7 or more short pieces, what I realized, especially after Hopla, which is the one that you guys showed at Aggregate, was that the no conflict, no story school of filmmaking bugs me.
Right.
And personally, I think there's an application of healing also that is possible with video and audio, and I wanted to do something that was about healing from trauma rather than showing how trauma happens. Which Hopla was about showing how trauma happens,
right?
In many respects, and this was coming from personal experiences where someone did something to me on the street, or things where I was the bad actor, or things that you just read about, or all kinds of stuff that's out there in the world, and I'm kind of asking a question with each of these videos of like, what is the mood of healing?
Mm-hmm.
And each of them seems very different to me. And also because I'm starting from scratch with the digital program that I use.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's something that's really very basic. It's Sketchbook from Autodesk.
Oh, it's such a good piece of software for animation.
They've updated it 1,000,000 times since I started using it many years ago.
Right.
I used to use it and make just serial still images over and over again with different altered by layer or something, and now they've got a whole completely different interface for you to do this with.
Yeah, the keyframing is so incredible that they added a couple of years ago that just make, like, I mean, it is the best fast animation software that is whatever $20 a year or something crazy.
Or
like, it's
less. I think I have the free version.
Oh, you might have been grandfathered in on that. I don't know if new users are getting that same deal. But yeah, no, it is such a tremendous piece of software.
Yeah, and so in learning that and seeing how it was so much easier to work with some of these digital images rather than every time saving as a PSD and as a JPEG, and for the various applications that these things had somewhere down the pipeline, it kind of the flipbook function, it sort of creates something for you out of all the things that you've been doing. It's just much simpler, and so using that and also exploring certain tools in After Effects that were new to me. With these digital images, it's like, oh, that just made something really cool, and I don't know quite what I did in terms of,
Yeah, no,
like,
I do.
There are people out there who do this like ho-hum, and they are creating very figurative stuff that is a part of a huge production. Where everything has to work together, and they have to know all, from the outside in, all the technology really, and I'm kind of going and saying like, oh, this makes something abstract happen that I can't do with paint, and that has some sort of inherent property to me, of it's soothing, some of the things that come out of it. And I think a lot of the techniques that I had used in Hopla, for example, I mean, there's a lot of jarring stuff in that. And that was partly the process, and it was partly the subject matter. So...
I'm so embarrassed that I've been pronouncing it wrong for like 3 years. I've been calling it hoopla.
Hoopla. Yeah, well, it's Hopla.
Hopla. Thank you.
Okay.
I get excited about so my like entrance into animation was through CAD software from the start. So I got really interested into like how can you animate with only camera movement without being able to animate objects and tell stories like that, and then which is something that you could do very early on with a lot of 3D software, even stuff that wasn't that complicated. And then later I started getting into like breaking dynamics of like higher end 3D stuff, which is After Effects kind of has absorbed some of those tools.
Right.
But when they used to be only in 3D model space, it was so easy to break them. And so when you had said, when I reached out about some subject matters for the talk, like you said that this idea of chasing experimentation in animation, and vagueness. I think you used the word vagueness, and I love that idea, because you're so everything for the most part is deliberate in animation, and the trying to find ways to generate things that happen on their own, like those happy accidents, as Bob Ross would call them, like those things that just sneak up on you. It's more difficult unless you can use a computer, or you can use you find ways to inject that, but then also by doing that aren't creating a scenario where it looks like you don't know what you're doing. Or it looks like that things are just so haphazard that they're unwatchable. You don't want to. I mean, for the most part, you don't want to dip into brackage territory unless that's your goal. So I like that that equilibrium that you're insinuating, that you're trying to find, and it's nice.
Animation is an area where I think people have a lot of preconceived ideas about what doesn't, and very low tolerance for things that don't fit. Some kinds of, and especially now, I mean, with the technology being what it is and everything. And I've had people say, well, you're an animator now, so to read such and such a book, which is, I tried checking it out of the library, and I forget it. I mean, it's wonderful, and really, it's a Disney history type thing.
Right.
And but I know, for example, that I can't draw that fast, and I know that I'm not heading in the direction of, I'm going to create a TV miniseries or something like that.
Yeah, right.
So I don't feel. I sort of allow myself not to meet these various technical hurdles.
Right.
I do things the way I can and the way I find out that are possible.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to me, and hopefully then things come out. And sometimes, of course, I'm very consciously messing with, this is done badly, it, and I know it, and that's the joke of this creature floating by.
Right. Yeah.
There's a character that at some point they're all kind of going like that across the screen from one direction to the other, and there's one that goes kind of like and it's completely wrong way, and I think some people get upset by things like that. It reminds me of when I was taking live action film and video classes at City College in San Francisco, and one of the instructors was talking about from a place so conservative that when films were letterboxed on the television, they felt ripped off.
That's the opposite.
Their viewing understanding was so formed by a certain technology that it was like, why aren't they showing us the whole picture? Something seemed cropped or something. So I think a lot of people have that kind of thing with animation.
Huh.
And also, though, it's not just animation, it's also, I think, with a lot of fantasy art in general, because there's such an industry around it.
Right.
And I'm an industry person, and I don't aim to be, and I don't have that background.
Mm-hmm.
So it's strange sometimes to exhibit paintings with people who are really doing this in a commercial design realm or something, and realize that they're just knocking that out, kind of like this is their bread and butter,
right.
And they have expectations though of what a character is supposed to do. So I'll get a question about attributes of my character that I've painted. And I haven't necessarily thought about that at all. I don't think about anything but, I make the character, and if I figure out that it looks good with something here or there, and how to make it move and do things, but it doesn't necessarily have a personality or skill set or superpowers or any of those things that many of us have come to expect. And I realize that it's just a completely different world.
Yeah.
And so I really don't usually call myself an animator, partly because I think that conjures
an expectation.
Yeah. And it's the background is much more fine arts than industry.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you and I both have a love for experimental animation.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of generating, of using this extremely broad definition of techniques that is animation, and creating something that is beyond expectation. Mm-hmm. And so I've been fortunate enough to be able to teach animation to youthful students at UC Davis, and it was like my favorite part about it was a lot of them, they weren't just art students. A lot of them were from like the graphic design departments or from the film department, and so to really just kind of like pare things down and kind of force them to do like exquisite corpse projects so that they let go of like planning, and like or give them rules that force them to not have a character that does a thing that character does. Like I adopted the technique of forcing them to move way too fast to be comfortable. And so the students that really wanted to do character design and do character animation were just forced out of that because they couldn't possibly accomplish the goal of the assignment if they were doing that. And so it forced them to do, repeat cuts and cheats and, doing copy paste into After Effects and moving things around rather than hand drawing everything. And, I mean, I think it's or like basically pixelating like with a phone,
Right. That's another one of these experiments of abstract things is actually, aside from the little individual character drawings that I do, which I think are very formed by the fact that the paper is that format. It really determines what comes out. But I've been doing these larger ones that are about 16 by 20 with multiple characters in them. And at first it was just rows. And sometimes someone deviates from the row or something happens. But what I realized was that because I was sharing these on Instagram and I would video them sometimes rather than sharing a still, is that by layering these mini videos and sort of pixelating them, and then I had a happy accident with a color bar thing and a terrible noise, and it made this kind of, it was like animated flaming creatures.
Yeah.
It was like this giddy thing was happening, and I haven't decided exactly what the sound for that is going to be. Whether that, I don't really want it to just be like the high beep thing.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's but there's an aspect of that in terms of like, oh gosh, animating a character, so much work goes into animating a single character. And what if I just make all of them at once have some vitality to them?
Right.
So, and then you've got a kind of a glimpses of figures as they pixelate in and out. But you don't necessarily focus on an individual one that does something and so forth. And so that's another part of this. And that might be the one that's most like trauma, actually, rather than like healing, because it's so the strobe effect.
Yeah. So I'm gonna just take a really, really quick pause because there may be some internet issue, and I just have to go check on something. I just got a notification that things were hiccuped, so I apologize to our live viewers. There are a few of you out there if we lost a few moments, but I'm gonna just go double check something in a very, very quick emergency. I will be back in less than 30 seconds. I'll leave you hang out for a second.
Okay. How you doing, everybody? Here's a little spot for my, I don't know if this is recording actually, but this is the cover of my zine. This is the design for the cover of my zine that I'm issuing at some point this year, which has lots of characters in it, like the ones that I showed earlier, individual. And that's about that.
What did I miss?
Advertising.
Advertising?
Yeah. I did a little promo for a zine that I'm...
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
That's great. You know, I so often forget to ask people promotional things. You know, it's so funny that like this new idea for me is like a totally new thing. And the idea of just limiting it to the conversation and allowing that to go where it goes is something that's very valuable to me, but also I should be smarter and try to commodify it in some way so that it has a little bit more of a value.
People do what they feel like doing is really cool, and commodifying it. If I felt that it was about that, I would feel less. I would personally feel more awkward.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, the fact that I think there's more people watching this live than have watched any of them live.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So you've spread the word appropriately.
Good.
And I to kind of like swing back to those happy accidents. I mean, do you feel like the idea of an experiment, because it's so like unable to be quantified, becomes problematic when you get lost in that space? Or do you trust your own judgment? Do you find yourself able to watch what happens and say, this mistake that just happened is what the whole piece is about now. I'm going to embrace that, and I trust that my instinct is fine?
I sometimes have to filter what other people say about some of these mistakes that I find interesting. That's one thing.
Yeah.
But another thing is that I hold on to like everything that I make. So it can take years before I decide something is really what it was supposed to be all along. I give myself that luxury, which doesn't mean that I always have the opportunity to show somebody that this was this wonderful accident that I think is really cool, you know,
right.
20 years, whatever. But sometimes things really do come around into newer projects that, you know, I actually made decades ago. So
right.
that, and which didn't stand on their own at that time. So they can always, and that's a really fortunate aspect of animation, and is that you can bring so many elements into it. Hopla had some characters, for example, that I had painted in like 1995.
Whoa.
And as a project back then, it couldn't really go anywhere. But as animation characters,
right,
they had a role. So yeah, I mean, with these abstract animations that I'm working on now, I feel really like it's been so back burner that I'm avoiding saying this is what it's going to be.
Uh-huh.
But I also just think, well, that's about editing.
Yeah.
You know, ultimately, and that I don't feel certain where I'm going with that, because figuring out which music fits which image when it's that abstract, it's like, okay, what is really the mood of this? You know, and do I have something that fits? Because I'm not, as a musical composer, someone who sits down and says, I think it sounds like this in my head, and it produces exactly what's in my head.
Yeah.
I am just messing around with that. So I started using Ableton about a year and a half ago, and hadn't made music in decades, and within a year I had about 50 little tracks, not all of them complete, but that's exactly what the videos are like.
Right.
They're little ideas. And then there's some tracks that are really have a beginning, middle, and an end.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's kind of fun. You know, I mean, and I listen to widely enough in music to know that people do these kinds of things in music. You know what I mean? So it's not just, I don't feel like these are unfinished and they're bad and I'm not getting anywhere. I feel like I've actually gotten pretty far.
Yeah.
Some tunes I like better than others, and then I get into situations sometimes for a couple of weeks where I don't like anything I make. You know, I mean, it's like anything you do.
Yeah. Do you when you finish a piece, do you feel like that's the end of it, or do you tinker?
Music or image or
image? Like when you finish something that you say, this is an animation with sound, I'm finished with it. Are you finished with it, or is it iterative?
It's been pretty much I'm finished with it. I try to get things out the door because I have this compulsion to prove that I'm still living and active, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's also because it's just like I have so much stuff that nobody's ever seen art-wise that I feel like this is helping me interact with the world every time I make a piece and put it out there, and that helps for all the pieces that may emerge in the future. You know, I mean, it's just one of these. So some of my videos have floated around festival circuits for a number of years.
Right.
But after a year or two, I always feel like if I don't have something out there that's new by now, there's something that's something amiss. And it's sort of strange that it's boiled down to being experimental videos or animations that get around mostly. Because in my 20s, I was much more of a sort of conceptual performer and did installations out of like, I mean, I would use the garbage on the floor kind of thing. I mean, I was a very different personality then. And then I had a phase of working in theater, and then a phase of live action video, digital video. I had done film earlier, but by the time, you know, it became just financially impossible to continue working in that medium for most people.
Right.
And digital video made it possible for me to continue with moving images at all. I forget what the question was.
There's no questions. No, nobody's interested in answers to any questions.
Right.
So another thing that you mentioned that you're working on is collaboration.
Yes, I have a collaborator who is not able to participate because it's late where she lives. It's the middle of the night, and she's asleep with her cat. So, apologies for Teal Fraser, who lives in London.
Mm-hmm.
We've done some sound pieces, which involve poetry and music. And we've done some writing exchanges.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been trading envelopes of visual stuff.
Okay.
But we don't know what we're doing really yet at all. So that's the other reason that I haven't spoken about it.
That's so great.
She's not here and it's not ready. So
right.
That's kind of the situation.
I love it. That's what I want to talk about. So so at what point in the not readiness is it? Like, what started the collaboration?
Oh, well, we've known each other for years and years, and we've worked on some things in the past long ago, so that we know that we can collaborate. But since she lives in London and I live in Berkeley, we've had a few times where we tried to make things happen where we didn't realize quite what rules we had to have in place in terms of just how to get stuff to one another. We started with the mailing out envelopes.
Right.
And then COVID happened, and unlike in the United States where the mail is really, everybody is dependent on the mail, in Britain, in London anyway, only the central post office remained open.
Huh.
So to get anything became over there or out of there became really difficult.
Wow.
And took a really long time. And also, I think that maybe rates went up from our end to the UK. I don't know. It was one of those moments where I went to the post office and it was just an ordinary, not too full envelope, and it cost a lot of money to send it. And I thought, well, we can't keep doing this. And I had a feeling about it. And also, it was one of those moments of anger because, of course, Donald was involved in it somehow.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Or the post office, I thought he was had done something to the rates,
Yeah, quite possibly.
That's how these things go. But in terms of how do we know where we don't know.
That's amazing.
Except that we know one another.
Right.
And we know one another now since like 1989 or so. We met in Berlin.
Right. Are you generating rules? Are you?
We do for little parts of things sometimes, but it's really so much about just finding
synergy.
Yeah, exactly. The moment when things click.
Right.
She's active in a lot of different mediums and a lot of different activities, and I'm doing a lot of things on my end, and we don't. It's not like we don't have other irons in the fire.
Right.
So, but then sometimes it's like, and we get some clarity of like, this is one where we could both do this on or that, or so. It's really fun.
Yeah.
It's fun. Yeah.
Have you collaborated with people in the past? Up close?
Yeah,
or?
there was 2 videos ago that have been on festival circuits. There was Suddenly Last Winter, which has a terrible title, and I regret it, but it was just so much of its time. It was It was my vomiting up of the Trump appointees.
Sure.
After I started making collages of all his appointees in December before he was inaugurated. All the images of them were coming up in the news, like this is going to be the Secretary of Labor, and this is going to be, and again, one horror show after another. And so I've been making these collages, and I have a friend in Berlin who makes music, who was actually the one who put me on to learning Ableton. And after we did the collaboration on this video, suddenly last winter, where they did the music and I did the visual track, they said, like, you should learn Ableton. This would be really cool for you. And they started making visual stuff. I mean, they're visual artists as well anyway, but they hadn't been making films before. So we sort of traded mediums after the collaborations in some respects. But and then they have another project going also that when I was there last August I participated in, which is a sort of a photo and film project. So that was another thing. And I mean, there have been times when all I did was work with other people.
Right.
Really.
Film and theater.
Lead artist necessarily, and that was a totally different experience. Like working in theater. Worked for George Coates for a number of years, and films that I did, and the film I did in Berlin, Tarot of Berlin, was all going out with people and to public places and doing little drag acts of the tarot, and I mean, and that was so there've been lots of things, or other people have magazines that or I used to do videography for other people's bands and things, and so there's been a lot of that, but I've been very isolated for the last 10 years or so. Actually, I mean, comparatively,
right. So it's a refreshing change of pace to not know where you're going with another person, rather than not knowing where you're going with just you.
Yes.
So when you think about generating an animation, do you think about if it's going to be something that's going to loop, or do you think about if it's going to be something that's going to occur as a one-off, as part of a festival reel? Like, do you make those assessments?
I really liked what Aggregate Space did with the looping in the gallery. I liked that so much. That's been one of the best screening experiences I've had, because I love that people can come and go during movies. That they can see it more than once.
Right.
That they can come back another day and see it again. With completely fresh eyes. And that was wonderful. On the other hand, I've also been in festivals where it was just screened the one time, and the wonderful thing of that is, you get all the nervous energy of a festival, and you have the little Q&A at the end, and you meet people face to face and stuff, and you don't remember any of it because you were too anxious. People, and you have the little a little glitz and glamour of a red carpet moment or so forth, so I don't necessarily, I guess there's been one thing that turns into I knew it was kind of for a gallery space. One piece that I did. That was the piece that was at Crow's Work, and called Still You Must Go.
Do you know? I may or may not have seen it. I don't remember.
Yeah, because for a while I had been feeling about screenings that I didn't really like just the one-off thing, as much as I thought just that even my own work was more attuned to maybe being in a gallery space than, because Tarot of Berlin was 86 minutes long on Super 8, and it is very slow.
Wow.
There's a lot of repetition in it, and there was a wonderful screening at Vortex Space in Soma a number of years ago, where we watched it sort of piece by piece and had intermissions and stuff.
Oh, okay.
And it's Vortex Space was a speakeasy, and so people were sort of regulars who, come to have a martini and watch a weird movie. It could be something from a B movie from the 70s, or it could be something that somebody local had made, or, and so that was a cool thing too, because I think that when I had showed Tarot of Berlin, and it screened very rarely in theaters, you got a lot of people who can't sit still that long for a movie like that. And,
right, yeah.
It was really pushing it. That was my second movie, I guess, and it was really pushing it to expect them to
buy in all the way.
So I was, when I was working on Still You Must Go as I was working on Hopla, and they were finished within about 6 months of one another.
Okay.
Totally different from one another. But it was really, it was pretty clear to me that it was going to be a loop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get excited about animation that is built for the loop. We have that the issue of the animation festival at iGreat is always that it's the expectation is that this will be played once in a reel of several other things. So the idea of a pure loop isn't possible.
Right.
But your Hoopla was so long,
right,
that it was it kind of dominated the space long enough that I found myself as a gallery sitter looking forward to the next version, and I feel like I watched parts of it and the entirety of it so many times, and I still never felt like I could get all the way around it, and I loved that about it. Like I love that feeling as a viewer of knowing that I will never get enough information to finish.
That was the experience of making the movie.
Yeah, right.
Occupy was happening while I was making Hopla.
Yeah, it reads, right? It's there.
Sometimes some of the stuff actually happened in various cities, literally, and it would end up in the movie, except that, I don't work so fast that it's not like the next day's newspaper or something. It's not journalistic in that sense, but some of it had happened in my life years before, in other people's lives years before, but
but it was like a fever dream. Like it felt like it had such momentum, and the music passing in and out, and the voice work passing in and out, and like all of those the samples that existed in the sound that you just were berated with, and I felt like just when I started to feel like parts of it were coalescing into an experience, or like a plot, like something that I could follow, it would be dissolved and jump time periods, and it set me back. And I just loved the experience of that piece as something that I could like walk by and participate in for 3 or 4 minutes and be overwhelmed, and then go about what I was doing, and then come back and see another 4 or 5 minutes that maybe overlaps and maybe doesn't. Like it had all of the qualities of a good loop, in that you don't necessarily need to, like, you can get a lot out of it by only participating in it for a brief amount of time. But then if you do watch it on multiple loops, you maybe don't get all of it anyway. Like it's just there was so much there to be mined. Anyway, I don't know. I don't want to gush over that piece, but I really like that piece.
Yeah.
I
Well, as I'm told by people who have done lots of video installations in museums and observed lots of them, and maybe have spoken with museum people about this, about the limit of time that anybody can sit with a video in a museum is about 12 and a half minutes.
that's I think that's very generous.
That seems right to me when I go to the museum. It's like, yeah, okay, I feel like I'm really, on the precipice there. I'm being really adventurous if I stay for 12 and a half minutes and watch that long, But it's Hoplite. It just had so much. I mean, I had a lot to say for that piece.
It reads.
Yeah.
So I prepare a small quote.
Oh yes.
From you've seen the show. That's great.
Yeah, I watched a couple episodes.
So I dug this quote out of the one that I'm quoting from the most because it's the biggest and has the best index, which is the Arthur Koestler, The Act of Creation. And this is like in this section. It's in this section of the book called the Spark and the Flame. And it's about like how ideas gain traction and move forward in the process of creativity. And it's after a quote, but it's talking about the difference between science and art and the value of experimentation in both and the results of experimentation in both. And as always, it's like ultra dense, and I'm reading it out of context. But the hope is that it generates some thoughts, either for this conversation or for the viewer. And I'll do my best to not mangle it as I read it. It's not too long, but maybe a minute or so. T.H. Huxley has said that the tragedies of science are the slayings of beautiful hypotheses by ugly facts. Against this tragedy, at least, the artist seems to be immune. On the other hand, it is generally believed that the scientist can at least rely on the verification of his intuitions by experiment, whereas the artist has no objective tests to decide whether or not he should burn his manuscript or slash his canvas to pieces. In fact, however, quote, verification by experiment can never yield absolute certainty, and when it comes to controversial issues, the data can usually be interpreted in more than one way. The history of medicine is full of obvious and distressing examples of this, in physics and chemistry too. The best we can do by so-called crucial experiments is to confirm a prediction, but not the theory on which the prediction is based. And scientific controversies about the interpretation of experimental results have been just as passionate and subjective as controversies between theologians and art critics. If a hunch is drastically contradicted by experiment, it will of course be abandoned. But by and large, scientists are inclined to trust their intuitions, and if confronted with experiments which give ambiguous or divergent results, either to declare, as Einstein once did, that the facts are wrong, or as Hobbes did, the instance is so particular and singular that 'tis scarce worth our observing, or resort to the standard phrase that is the unfavorable experimental result is due to an unknown source of error, hoping that someday, somehow, it will all work out. Modern theoretical physics lives to a large extent on that hope. Thus, verifiability is a matter of degrees, and neither the artist nor the scientist who tries to break new ground can hope to achieve absolute certainty.
Well, that brings to mind a book that I read recently.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it does. By Celine. A short work of his called Semmelweis, which was actually, I think he presented it as a thesis when Celine was a medic. Maybe first and foremost, in certain ways. And Semmelweis was the guy who figured out, long before pasteurization was discovered, and before Pasteur came along and so forth, that washing your hands made a difference in the operating room.
Yes.
Basically. I mean, what was happening was that all these women were dying in childbirth.
Yes.
And he did some experiments, scientific experiments, which showed that the people who were in the hospitals where everybody was instructed to wash your hands after you had handled these corpses the night before in your anatomy studies, the medical students,
right,
that they had more people live through childbirth. But Semmelweis was a personality who was so difficult for people to handle. Probably he was difficult, but also they had their agendas. That this, the results of his experiments, which, I mean, they really just showed the truth. But he was sort of kicked out of the profession and sent to some other station here and there and stuff, and the results were buried for decades. And then so Ben Pasteur came along and proved something in a way that people could at that point accept.
Yeah.
Which was largely similar.
Right.
But that's what your quote brought to mind.
Yeah. I mean, I think I get excited about the idea of verification as part of experimentation being always required. And whether you're an artist or a scientist, like if you're experimenting, you're out there looking for some level of confirmation that it's that either you have bias or that it is successful or that it won't work, and that artists somewhat similarly, even when we're trying to work in the world of vagueness, which again I think is like I think untrained artists view vagueness as a cop-out, but people that have been working in arts their whole life look at it as a goal. That the goal is to generate a space where ideas are fresh and new within the audience. And so that thought that it's the experimentative quality of it and the seeking out of verification that makes it confirmed or not. And that the verification that often the pieces that I celebrate and the pieces that you obviously celebrate are looking for verification that is inconsistent. They're looking for that response that isn't the same from every person, that it swings wildly, and that's what we're trying to lock down is this moment from humanity that isn't necessarily entirely based on the artwork, but is based on what's going on in the viewer's mind or the viewer's experiences that day, and that bleeds into the artwork, and that the artwork influences that kind of back. And you end up in this unique situation for every viewer and every experience that they have with it, which is, again, the opposite. Like science is really trying to lock something down, and we're just trying to like open the doors as wide as possible for as many people as possible.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I like that's why that quote gets me a little excited, because it just it puts it in scientific terms with some backup that we're all after that, but the results differ.
Well, yeah, but are we after results is the thing.
Right.
Yeah. And that's another angle on it. So I actually essentially am not a very result-oriented person, and I feel that society demands that I show complete artworks. Right. But everything is really always in process for me. Yeah. And I'm very impressed by any artist who gets away with showing that that's the truth of their work. Right. And how do they manage to, complete, to bring that across is, and convince people that you can have things in various states of completion that give a sense of, for the viewer, someone else's experience.
Right. Yeah, yeah, like Ryan Trecarton's work comes to mind because it's so like frenetic and not necessarily made with any authorship whatsoever, but like a facilitated experience, shot and developed by the people that are involved, and like it's so far from our understanding of film, but also like because of that, it's very open to people saying this is terrible to watch. But I think like by opening that door, it puts it puts you in that zone. But the same, like again, like to go back to Brakhage, who was like his work wasn't appreciated until decades after he was dead. Like he was after this feeling, like he was after taking advantage of a medium that was denying all of this level of experimentation and refocusing it back on itself in such a way that like the poor guy died broke, and then afterwards people start to look back at it and be like, holy shit, he was really digging into what this is as a physical object far more than anybody else was looking at it. And, I mean, I don't know if you ever watched, like, Dog Star Man in a crowd without the sound of the projector, but it's like, you hear every time somebody scratches their face, Like, it's not, like, people, like, that's 45 minutes of hard silence, without the, I feel like they should reproduce his films with the fake sound of a projector running so you can watch them on Blu-ray with a little bit of distraction. But I don't know. I get excited about that that line and that history and trying to find vagueness, seeking it out. Thanks so much, Eddy. This was really fantastic.
Thank you. This is fun.
I really appreciate it, and good luck with everything. And I hope to elbow bump you someday in the future. And I'll keep you posted about aggregate up and coming things. There are some things are reactivating slowly but surely in their new oddball way. So
I'm so glad.
and thanks for joining me. I will, absolutely.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, thank you to Eddy Falconer for being my guest this week on this new idea. I will be back on Thursday at 5 p.m. with J.K. Fowler, executive director and co-founder of Nomadic Press out of Oakland. I can't wait to talk to J.K. I haven't talked to him in a little while, and so much of the world has changed, and J.K.'s role in the Oakland community is really incredible, and I just look forward to hearing about what he's working on under these circumstances. So join me Thursday at 5 p.m. and thank you all for being here on this live chatcast of this new idea. If you get a chance, please subscribe to the channel and please come back for more. I am just so happy that so many people have been watching this live. So thank you again. My name is Conrad Meyers, and I will see you next time on This New Idea.